So let's talk about optic capture.
We're gonna do a pars plana assisted anterior vitrectomy because the plan here is not to just put a lens in the sulcus and call it a day. The plan is to try and use the capsule. So every single time that I'm doing some sort of IOL exchange, I'm like, can I use the capsule? So here we are initiating a anterior and posterior capsulotomy here. So here's our anterior capsulotomy that she already made. And then I use the cystotome to break into the posterior capsule. I'm using the Cybele micro forceps from MST, and they're great for capsulorhexis. They can go through a side port, you can go through your main incision without collapsing the chamber. So really great for eyes where you don't want to collapse the chamber. And so here we're actually following the template of her anterior capsulotomy. But when I start getting to this area where she encountered the zonulopathy, and you can tell because there's a lot of fibrosis of the capsule in that area and wrinkling, I stop and say, you know what, I don't like the tension that I'm seeing right there. And I really want to maintain the anterior zonule and the equatorial zonule. The posterior zonules don't work so much anymore, but they do peripherally in this case. So here we're going to enlarge the anterior and posterior capsulotomy instead of simply trying to tear it because of that area of previous zonulopathy. And so here I'm actually using the vitrector to enlarge, because if you're going to try and capture a 6 millimeter optic, you want to be, 4.5 to 5 millimeters of having an opening so that you can actually capture. This case is finishing up, very nicely. We're going to end up putting wash Kenalog or preservative-free triamcinolone, diluted 1 to 10. Make sure you get some of the OVD out before you actually put in the Kenalog, because then you won't see the staining of the vitreous strands. This is a nice lens that comes out planar, the Li61 AAO. I like that it comes out planar. You don't have to supinate, pronate, just comes out where you want it. It's silicone, a friendly lens for any patient with dysphotopsia. And then we're going to rotate it into the sulcus. So Brandon, how do you decide where we're going to put these optic-haptic junction when you're doing an optic capture? In general, you want to put the optic-haptic junction where there's the strongest point of the anterior capsule.
But Nicole, this is why we always promote doing a fixation technique, because now, honestly, as long as that optic is captured in the posterior rhexis, even if the haptic is in the area of zonulopathy, it's not going to dislocate. If that lens was just in the sulcus, that haptic would find that area, and you're going to be repositioning in another couple months.
So I don't know if you noticed, what we did was we snuck it under the anterior capsule, and then we snuck it under the other anterior capsule. So it's a sneak and tuck. Optic capture isn't just pushing down. You sneak it, and then you tuck the other side. And so you want to confirm that you have stability, and you want to make sure that so I didn't put it this way because this is where a lot of the zonulopathy was. So even that way would have been better, right? We avoided having to do any suture technique. We used the capsule. And so to me, this is really Plan A+. It's a little bit more sophisticated in terms of how you would do a secondary IOL, and you have to be comfortable with your vitrectomy techniques in your middle segment. But I think the case really finished up nicely. Patient did well, and they recover so fast.
All right, so we'll continue along the lines of posterior, approach to a vitrectomy. And this is a patient of mine. You can see this is a traumatic cataract. We don't know it's traumatic, but I can tell you it's a traumatic cataract. There's also an area of iridodialysis, and what you can't see real well is there's vitreous prolapse through that. So first thing we do is triamcinolone, right? Because I need to be able to see where the vitreous strands are. And if you don't do something to visualize vitreous, you don't know. And here we're able to actually wall off the vitreous using a dispersive OVD, so it's out of the way for the surgery. So now the IOL portion is pretty much done, but we have to take care of this vitreous because it's time to move on. I was very happy with the way the cataract went. Now it's time to address the iris. So it's very hard to get that peripheral, get vitreous from the anterior segment, because as you're doing your anterior vitrectomy, you're pulling more vitreous up, so you got to go behind. This is the Vista. This is a custom-made vitrectomy. It's 27 gauge bi-blade vitrector and has a needle tip on the end of it, right? So if you think you can do kind of one in, one out vitrectomy, this works very nicely. Just pressurize the eye, high pressure. It goes in like a 27 needle and the cutter's right behind it. Go into the eye, don't be afraid of vitrectomy. And now we're moving on to this is the dialysis repair. And what's interesting about doing a dialysis repair is you tend to ovalize the pupil. Even though you're trying to take just the itty bittiest bit of that peripheral iris, there's some damage there and you're going to get some ovalization of the pupil. So there's several different techniques that we can use to try and then round out, if you will, the iris. So very often after we're finished with this, we'll go just like this. We'll do maybe a little mini cerclage or 1 or 2 bites on the iris, gather the pupil where it's dysfunctional, and you'll get a much better cosmetic result.
What forceps are you using there?
So that is probably the MH forceps, most likely. I'll use either a micro holder or a micro grasper. Those are my 2 favorite instruments for iris repair. And then that's a CIF4 needle, 10-0 polypropylene needle. These are tires that aren't mine and they probably stink, but we're gonna do basically a 4-throw pupilplasty to gather the pupil. Using the horizontal scissor to cut the sutures inside the eye, cut them nice and short. And then check one last time to make sure there's no vitreous. And after a big case like this, having a little triamcinolone around in the anterior segment, probably not a bad idea.
Right, as long as it's...
And then so we'll put some in. I dilute mine about 1 to 5, 1 to 10. That was probably 1 to 5. Swirl it around just to make sure there's no strands. If there are, you go back with your vitrector and you cut those strands away.
This is a 92-year-old who he has glaucoma. He doesn't have a lot of accessible conjunctiva. So I didn't want to use Gore-Tex. I didn't want to disrupt it. And I wanted to do a procedure where there'd be the least amount of hypotony in a 92-year-old on anticoagulation. I make a little bit of a bevel in a Z conformation radially as I go under the posterior capsule, pierce through the anterior capsule. And this is with 6-0 polypropylene, but I'm using 7-0 polypropylene now. And we're docking it in. But as you dock into that needle, you have to really push and as you pull out, or else it'll come right out. And then you're like, I came out of the eye, there's nothing there, right? So it's like a push and pull. And so the titration is really important. So at first, when we've lassoed, I leave both ends at about 3 millimeters each. And then I kind of titrate on each side to see how it's gonna sit. Because when you use off-label Gore-Tex and you're doing a lasso, it hugs the optic-haptic junction. But when you use polypropylene, there's a little bit of memory to the polypropylene. And so it's a little bit of a hangback, okay? We're gonna do it again. So because of that, you really wanna make sure you understand the difference. Then you can see here, I'm not just leaving a gigantic flange subconjunctivally. I am actually putting it into, so if you see here one more time, I'm actually putting into that light blue appearance into the sclera. Same thing on the other side. So I will do a little buttonhole to confirm. Now, sometimes you see them like a month post-operatively, and you have video evidence that you buried that flange, and it'll come out because there's a little tenons there. But as long as it's not extruding through the conjunctiva, you're probably okay. But if you make a huge, gigantic flange and you think it's not gonna erode over time, subconjunctivally in an eye that has no tenons, you're sadly mistaken. And that wasn't the original description by Sergio Canabrava. When you look at his 5-year data, which is a brilliant paper, those flanges and those pictures of what he shows are fully buried in the sclera. Okay, they're not subconj. So I wanna make sure everyone understands that. Just like when you use Gore-Tex, you have to bury the knot in a sclerotomy and cut the ends and then bury the ends in the sclerotomy fully.